All right, we want to welcome you here to Time to Man Up. This is Clay Cross, Saving the World. One of my just favorite songs of his when we decided to launch a podcast for Time to Man Up. There was one song and only one song that I really wanted to get for the podcast, and that was his song, Saving the World, to use the intro. I've always loved that, and when I reached out to Clay Cross, he was so gracious and willing to let us do that. So just a special thanks to Clay for letting us use the intro for Saving the World as our podcast intro, and what a blessing that was. Along the way toward launching the podcast on January 17th, there have been a lot of people who have played important roles in this, and we are so grateful to all of those who have been part of encouraging us, challenging us, stepping up even in providing things that we needed for the podcast. It has just been God's provisions over and over and over through the use of people in our lives, and we are so grateful for that. What's amazing is that after 32 years of marriage, and I am blessed with a wife that has put up with a lot of stuff as we have moved toward this launch. It has been some crazy months of preparation, and she has just been an amazing help to me. But along the way of marriage for 32 years, I've learned a lot of important lessons along the way. Some from things I did well, some from things I did not do very well in. And then after raising three amazing kids who are now out on their own adulting, I also learned a lot of things. I learned, number one, that you're not going to be a perfect parent, but praise God, He is active in our kids' lives, and He is able to do far more than we are ever able to do on our own. So then, the entire time my wife and I have been married, I've been in ministry. I've been in ministry for 32 years, and so 32 years of marriage and 32 years of ministry, and she has been right there with me. And then within those 32 years of ministry, there have been countless hours of counseling couples in their marriage and trying to help them see the truth of God's word and that they can have a successful marriage, be successful parents. They just have to be able to trust God to be able to work those things out. Also, through the time of ministry, I was able to serve in men's ministry, and God continued to grow a heart, a passion for men's ministry, and He has used that in amazing ways. But as those 32 years of ministry took a toll, and basically I found myself in a place I'd never been in before where I was burned out, and God was leading me away from full-time ministry. He had used people in my life to either push on me to be out of the ministry, or He had also used people to encourage me in a new direction. No matter what it was, God was doing something to get me where I needed to be so that He could then use me for a total different direction that we never expected to be heading in, which meant that we moved from Ohio to Florida, 14 hours away from where we had known home for 14 years. The benefit, the bonus of that was that all three of our kids after graduating college had located in the same area in Florida. And so when we didn't have a job, we pointed the arrow and shot it right toward where they lived. And fortunately, they were more than happy to have us near them, which is great. In that time, I started two new businesses. The first business came out of, I started making candles, more of a stress relief. And I just found that I really enjoyed it. And someone said, you need to start a business with that. Never thought that would happen. It did. The second business was the one that was the most important to me, and that was the Time to Man Up ministry. What I wanted to do is, if it wasn't going to be full-time ministry, I wanted to find a way that God could use me, and with that passion that He had given me for men, it seemed like a natural thing to start a Time to Man Up ministry. And what was neat along the way is when I thought, really, I don't have a lot to say. I don't really know what I can offer people. A number of people came along and said, you need to do this. And that was so encouraging to me. And then it came time to launch a podcast. When we first moved down to Florida, it was never our plan to launch a podcast. Our plan was to come down to develop some curriculum that would help encourage men that they could take into their churches, but it was never to launch a podcast. And what that meant is I've got a really great wife, because she allowed me to take that heart for men, that desire to help them become the men God desires them to be able to take that, to be able to turn a bedroom in my home into a studio. So in essence, when we have people come and visit, we've got one less place they can stay, because she allowed me to turn it into a studio where we can film, record these podcasts. Along the way also, I began developing the curriculum. I'm so excited that just recently, and you can see it over my shoulder over here, you can see the Man Up workbook. We were able to develop a curriculum for men. We've got 3 developed, one just we published, and we are so excited about what God has for that. But never did I think that I would do a podcast until within a short period of time, a number of people said, Sean, you need to do a podcast. Guys need to hear this. So I hope that what we are about to jump into, I hope that it will bless men, that it will bless families, that it will challenge men to be better husbands, better dads, better men in their community and in their churches. That is our hope of what we would accomplish in this podcast. So that launches Tuesday, January 17th. We can't wait. Those podcasts are going to be every Tuesday for approximately an hour. We often tease that a pastor has a hard time hitting that time frame, but we are going to do our best to be within an hour, to respect your time. But sometimes I'm sure we'll have some people involved in those podcasts that have a lot to give, and we don't want to hold back from anything that we can offer you to help and encourage you. And then we are also looking at future expansion for the podcast. I don't know when it's going to take place, but we will begin with the Tuesdays for men. Somewhere along the line, we will begin on Thursdays doing a separate podcast that will be for couples to jump into the areas of marriage and parenting. And the hope is this, the hope that God will be able to help families be strengthened in their marriage, strengthened in their families, and that God will use not just my successes along the way of being a parent with 3 adult children now, but also that God will use my willingness to share some of those failures that God still used. What I found in parenting is this, is that whether I was successful or failed, God was still ultimately in control. And that's one thing we always have to remember. So we are looking at doing that at a time. Another thing that's going to be involved in the Time to Man Up podcast is we are going to be having interviews when those afford themselves, when we have opportunity for that, so that you can discover the lessons that God has taught other people along the way. We are going to be reaching out to people that hopefully you will know. We can reach out to them and you can hear their testimony of what God has done in their life. I am so excited about those opportunities to interview people. For some of you that know the history of Time to Man Up, you will know very quickly one of the guys that we're going to be interviewing, Doug Jackson. He was part of our ministry there in Ohio, and he did the entire Appalachian Trail. We're going to be having him on here for you that are you guys that love to go hiking. Man, think about that, the entire Appalachian Trail. We can't wait to be able to chat with him about that. So that's going to be some of the interviews that we'll be doing. Another thing that we're going to be doing is Hess on Point, and those are going to be short segments focusing on relevant issues of the day. So when there are things that become relevant in the news, things that are going on in our culture, we want to take opportunity to address those and try to give a biblical perspective to those things. And so that will be the Hess on Point. Those will not be main every week type of podcast things, but you can watch those for videos that will pop up either on our website or on one of our social medias that you can see that. And then some will be available on our podcast channels. That's what we have going on. And then finally, one thing that came to us, and I've titled it right now, Table Talk. Not sure what it'll end up being, but I remember when I used to go to McDonald's some mornings for breakfast just to be out of the office and to get some work done, and also just to mingle with people, to be able to hang out. And there was a group of men at McDonald's. They must have met there every day because I seldom came on the same day, but it felt like they were always there. And they would sit at this big table that fit 8 to 10 people around it, and they would just sit there and talk and tell their stories. I love sitting around the table and hearing people's stories. So as I began to prepare for Time to Man Up, I had an opportunity with my dad just to sit around and talk about a few aspects of life. And what I found was this: it was very enjoyable and it was very valuable. So what we want to do is we want to use Table Talk as a way for people to hear stories of what, people serving in the military or different areas of life or family situations, the loss of a loved one. We want people to hear those stories. Not sure the timetable for that. Don't know when it's going to happen, but that will be coming at some point, whether it's called Table Talk or something else, that will be coming out. But what I want to do is we get back to Time to Man Up. And as we look forward into moving into the Time to Man Up podcast, it took a little search down here to find what I was looking for. But I have this rock here, and I don't know about you, but I grew up always skipping stones. Love to do it. And there is just that perfect stone that, your finger fits perfect around it, and you can get it ready, and you can just chuck it right across the surface of the water. And we used to love, when we were younger and even older, trying to skip stones across the water and see who could skip it the most times. The reality is that once you got near the end, you couldn't count the skips because then it was like tick, 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 right across the water. But this skipping stone is small. And so for you that are listening, you won't see this, but it's a small stone that fits in your hand very easily and can be thrown. It's flat on the top and the bottom. Why? So that it can skip across the water. The sad thing about it is that this stone represents the relationship that most men have with each other. Because what happens in men's relationships is all they're doing is skipping stones. Their relationships are very surface. How did your sports team do? How is your job going? Or what about that nice car? Or what about the weather? And we never really get into asking the difficult questions. So we keep it safe. Because when you're on the surface, when you're just skipping stones, what you find is relationships are safe. Because if you don't ask hard questions, you're not going to be asked hard questions. So that's what we deal with when we look at that. Unfortunately, when times get tough and the battles begin to get difficult, they haven't formed those deep relationships. And so because they haven't forged those deep relationships, they haven't formed a brotherhood. And when time gets tough, all of a sudden, they look around and who do they have? They end up doing battle on their own, or they don't want to talk about the fact that they're struggling. And so they just stay on their own. God never meant it for it to be that way. God never meant for men to have to fight the battle on their own. He placed other men around so that they could be there to help. We need other men in our lives. We need them and they need us. And that brings us to this. I looked around a lot for this. Now, if you're just listening, you don't see this, but I've got a big, boulder rock in my hand. It's heavy. It's, to be precise, it's 9 pounds, 8 ounces. Here's what's funny. I went to a quarry to get this, and they deal in truckloads of rocks. And I went up to the lady that was working the desk, and I said, I need a rock. And she looked at me, and I know that she was probably ready to laugh, right? When you walk into a place that deals with large quantities of truckloads of rocks and you say, I would like one rock. It was so funny to see her face, and I told her what I needed it for, so she directed me to where I could go out and find the rock. And I go out there, and I said, well, what should I do when I'm done? She goes, take the rock and place it on the scale. So I found the rock after searching through. I found the one that I wanted, and I go up to the scale, and this scale is big enough to fit a pallet on it because they had rocks stacked on pallets. I go up and I set my one rock on the scale. It was hilarious. And then I walked in and I said, I've got my rock on the scale. Don't laugh when you go out there. She came in and she laughed and she goes, 9 pounds, 8 ounces. And I'm like, ooh, that's probably one of your biggest sales. And it was so funny to be able to see that. But what this represents is so important. Because what this represents is it is time to stop skipping stones across the surface. And it is time to start launching some boulders into the water. I love to throw a big old rock into a calm pond and just see the splash and then the ripple effect. And that rock goes below the surface, right? It gets deep down in there. And then all of a sudden the ripples just begin to go across the pond, and that once calm pond now has ripples all across it. That's what we want to do with Time to Man Up. We want to begin to build relationships that aren't skipping stones across the surface, but they are relationships that are throwing boulders into the water. We are building deep relationships with people. And what that means is when you are throwing boulders, you are willing to ask those questions, those difficult questions, and you are also willing to be asked those questions. So for Time to Man Up, we want to become a place where men can share their struggles without feeling like the elephant man, without feeling like they're the only man with a messed up marriage or a messed up life or struggling with their kids, struggling at their job. We know this, that men have got really good about putting on a show and not showing what life is really about for them. But we want to develop a place where we can be ourselves in hopes of becoming more like Jesus. We don't want to celebrate our failures. We just want to recognize them and admit to them and then seek to become more like Jesus. That's what Man Up is. And so on January 17th, we are going to begin that. And we hope that you will join us and that you will challenge other men to be paying attention and to be there with us on January 17th. To find out more information about Time to Man Up, you can go to www.time2timetomanup.com. www.time2manup.com. And there you can, at the bottom of the website, you can click on our social medias, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube, and you can find out what is going on at Time to Man Up. We encourage you to be part of that. And when you go to those social media accounts, we would really appreciate if you would like, follow, or subscribe, whatever they do. Clearly, I don't know this social media stuff very well, but whatever they want you to do, if you could do that for us, that would be awesome as we continue to build Time to Man Up, to become a ministry that can reach men, that can reach families, and that can begin to impact people for the cause of Christ. That's our desire. So spread the word. Time to Man Up is coming, Tuesday, January 17th. Can't wait to see what God has planned. Guys, it's time to man up. Have a great day, and we hope to see you on January 17th.